Welcome to Gossip About Gossip, powered by Hedera Hashgraph. In each episode, we'll cut through the hype of blockchain promises and explore real-world examples of organizations creating the next generation of decentralized applications, which will bring trust back to the internet for us all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Gossip About Gossip, the podcast where we talk about real-world applications of distributed ledger technology. My name is Zenobia Godstock, and I'm the SVP of Communications here at Swirlds Labs, helping to grow the Hedera ecosystem. Today, I am very excited to be joined by a longtime member of the Hedera community, perhaps one of the longest members of the Hedera community, Scott Thiel from DLA Piper and TOKO. It's so nice to have you back on.
Thanks, Zenobia. Fantastic to see you again, and great to be back on Gossip About Gossip.
Yes. So I know our audience is familiar with TOKO, but you guys have been very, very busy. Some of the things we will get to in more detail, but if you could just catch us up, what are some of the main milestones or things that you've progressed on in the last 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so we'll probably save some of the bigger news for a bit later, but to go back, I guess, the 6 to 12 months. So we've really moved into a phase of delivery. There was a lot of kind of building the original tokenization capability in the original engine, and then we've moved into real world applications in terms of working with asset owners and issuers who are now trying to actually bring to life this future of finance we've all been talking about and been promised for so long. And so that again has led to, I guess, some interesting technology developments as you get into the weeds of actually trying to do complex real world asset backed tokenization transactions. What's happened is we found new things that are needed to support that, and some of that is linked to requirements at law or compliance. So the need for compliance with securities rules or commodities rules or whatever the underlying asset might be as a matter of law. The technology now needs to support some of the legal requirements around that. So that's led to some additional feature builds, some sort of things around whitelisting, who can access, who can see what types of assets, some additional control mechanisms around recovery functions, which again, regulators, which we'll come back to in a minute, are very keen on seeing sort of control functions to deal with things like virtual asset, cybersecurity risk, and things of that nature. And then there are some things we've really been building on a client use case by client use case basis that support objectives like either the commercial imperative of what they're trying to achieve around a particular use case or a particular investor demographic that they're trying to access. So lots of these features then manifested themselves in additional TOKO functionality. I think the interesting piece of that has also flowed is the work we're doing with the Hedera tech community and Swirlds Labs in particular, where we've said, well, rather than us building it up at the kind of application layer, some of these things are going to be useful for other people. So how about we try and build that in down at the protocol level? And that's led us on a journey of authoring some of the HIPs that have recently been put through around sort of how do we control these tokens, how do we lock them, how do we unfreeze them, things like this that are required again for legal, regulatory, or commercial kind of requirements. And that's been a great journey because I think to date tokens have been very much the kind of fungible crypto type tokens with they're all the same, they're limited functionality. There's been the more sort of functional and controls around NFTs, sort of single assets, unregulated single assets. But as we've moved into, I guess, what we're calling semi-fungible tokens, and these are, groupings of things that are similar but all need to be traded. The simple analogy I use is that an old-fashioned dollar bill they're all the same, except they're not. They've all got a serial number on them, and there's good reasons for that. They're a good track and trace and other sort of legal requirements that come to that. So working with the technology team at the protocol level around bringing some of that to life's been part of the journey. And then I guess we've done some really interesting things like Quarter Homes. I know Shannon, a great client of ours, fantastic team at Quarter, who have been on the podcast recently. We tokenized the first of their US residential real estate projects, which was I won't go into that because I know Shannon's already done it, but it was fantastic to have an SEC regulated security token being deployed on Hedera. after kind of all of this work. And we're now working with them to not only support further issuances in the US market, but also to expand that project out to multiple markets as well. And again, this is what we've been building as part of kind of the global legal offering and tokenization offering, is the ability to take these projects everywhere.
You all are hitting on a piece that we don't talk about quite as much here, but it's becoming more apparent as blockchain technology becomes immersed in every area of our life, and tokenization affects every area of our life, is that, for example, the home ownership market has a very different set of rules and regulations and, things that they have to follow versus the, NFT art market. So it's great to see that coming together, right? And I think it feels like you all are really at the intersection of that.
Yeah, you're right. It's also the intersection of whether it's TradFi or government and this new technology. And real estate's an interesting example because it has a habit of sitting on a land registry that's typically a government-controlled thing, and land registries around the world are all different with their different rules. So, yeah, it's complex because how do you now go about interacting with what in some cases are very legacy systems that have a particular way of working, and now we're throwing together entirely new products that are all being digitized and capable of moving around on blockchains. Land registries weren't built with that in mind. So that intersection of the old and new, and we're seeing this in the funds industry as well, where some of the traditional roles that exist, the third-party transfer agent, the trusted third party that needs to keep a record of who owns things. Well, hang on, that's what blockchains do. They do an exceptional job of keeping a record of who owns what. And so you've got entire industries that are now potentially, what is their role going forward? And so, yeah, there's disruption, there's opportunity in that disruption, but you're right, asset by asset, sort of regulator by regulator, and country by country, they're all unique problems to be solved.
And you talked a little bit about the HIP process and how you all are contributing to that. As you engage with the community, are there certain things that you are able to share in terms of lessons learned, or how are you really trying to say, okay, great, now let's incorporate this for projects going forward?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of philosophies around this that we push quite hard in terms of we shouldn't be building some of this. Some of this is going to be, let me give an example of being able to lock a token up so that it can be transferred to an investor, but then becomes immovable for 12 months. And this is a very US-centric requirement under securities regulations, that if you want to sell securities to retail investors, then you can't have them retrading or moving for 12 months if you want to rely on a particular exemption under securities law. So it's a very legal problem that we have to solve. But then the question is, how do you lock a token, and how do you lock a token that might have a different timestamp on it? Because this one was bought today, that one was bought tomorrow, so the 12 months they're all running at the same time. And so this is where we had to, we're thinking, well, we could probably solve this problem. But guess what? We're not the only ones that are going to be deploying, regulated security tokens on Hedera. How about we try and build this functionality down at the base layer? And I think there's a real, obligation to share this learning so that the industry takes off. Gaining market share in the industry is going to be an important part of our journey, but more important is, I think, getting the industry going. So, we work really closely with the Swirls Labs teams around that. We came up with solutions around doing sort of partitioning of series or groupings of NFT and fungible assets to solve this problem. And it is critical to drive that innovation down at the protocol level so that others can now come and sort of stand on that functionality and build their own use cases.
Right. And some of them may be required to do it, and some of them may have never thought of it. But now that functionality is available, can think of a variety of ways they can use it.
Yeah, exactly.
You all recently announced a partnership with a company called VARA, and you have a full market license from them. Can you tell us who is VARA and what does that mean?
Okay, VARA is the regulator you all wish you had in your country when it comes to virtual assets. They are they're a regulatory startup, if you can imagine such a thing. So they created a brand new regulatory authority here in Dubai, where TOKO has now been expanded into, and much of our team, including myself, are now headquartered. And VARA regulate all virtual assets. So unlike, for example, in the US, where there's this great debate about which one fits into which regulator and what rules, and regulators all fighting about it, and the industry, sitting in the dark wondering who they're going to upset, and whose rules they should be following. So VARA came out and said, well, we're going to regulate all of them. It doesn't matter whether you're a crypto or an NFT or a digitized commodity or a payment coin or a utility coin or a digitized security. If you're a bundle of rights sitting in a token deployed on some sort of distributed ledger technology, then you are a virtual asset. And if you want to provide services around virtual assets, then you need a license. And the good news is we are we are the license provider. We are your regulator. These are the set of rules. So there's complete clarity now. Now it's not an easy set of rules, but they are. We know which ones apply. We know who our regulator is. We know what the rules are. And so it's a really interesting and frankly fundamentally different approach. I mean, it's not an approach we've seen take root in other markets, even in Europe with the MiCA regulations. They're still trying to define different types of virtual assets. My view is that is doomed to fail because the technology allows you to build things that won't stay put. They just won't. It won't stay in the buckets, in the TradFi buckets, like a traditional financial instrument will stay put, and it'll be a security the day you issue, and it'll always be a security. The nature of the technology means that you can create assets that are kind of hybrids of these things, and they'll look like one thing today, and then you use them in a different way tomorrow, and now they look like something else. And to me, that's part of the problem in the industry is regulators are right to say, well, that looks like something I should be regulating. Well, it does today, at least. When it does that, it is. And so
right.
This is the
I have a hammer, therefore.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where VARA come out and gone, let's do away with that confusion. So let's not start every virtual assets project with the need to get extensive legal advice about what it is, finishing with the conclusion, but we might be wrong because we're not sure. And so there's now no doubt. So the effort can be then put into focusing on how to actually deploy projects and put assets on chain. So that's really the difference with VARA. And we're very excited to get the first full market license. Now this is a game changer. Full market is there are different license categories. We're the first to get a full market exchange and brokerage license. The full market allows us to distribute digitized securities to retail investors without a 1-year lockup, without the kind of additional disclosures and registrations that you would need. And again, this is kind of heresy when it comes to traditional financial services, where people that fall into that retail camp need to be treated very differently. They're not allowed access to these products. Heaven forbid, people without much money get access to high yield products. And I get there are reasons for this. But in reality, what we see with blockchain is the promise of democratization of finance. Well, how can you democratize finance if you don't let people play? And so, again, this is a really fundamental shift where they've gone, well, we are going to allow people to play. There are guardrails, there are rules, there are disclosure requirements, there are all the sorts of things you would expect from a proper regime. But it doesn't start with the premise that retail may not play. And so that's a really interesting point, and it leads into some of the projects that we're now about to launch.
And, I think Dubai has been engaged in this conversation about digital assets for a long time. Do you see other geographies, other governments, other folks taking a look at what they are doing? How much are they sort of sharing that with the world at large?
Absolutely. There are limits to what I can disclose around this point, but there's also timely a couple of things I can specifically talk about. So without doubt, we are getting quite a lot of inquiries from other jurisdictions, particularly in the Middle East, as you would expect, where Qatar is just about to launch a framework. That's public knowledge. But perhaps more interestingly, and it was only, I can't remember if it was Friday or Saturday, but in the last few days, there's been an announcement about a collaboration between the Virtual Assets Authority here in Dubai and the Securities and Futures Commission and the Hong Kong regulators. So this is Hong Kong now going, I see what you're doing. Let's work on portability of virtual assets. Let's work on mutual recognition of these things, because again, the beauty of the technology, as we've seen with crypto, is it allows not only things like everyone can play, it allows things like 24/7 trading and instantaneous settlement. And it allows people to move these things across borders with little, if any, regard to national rules. Now, in the case of crypto, that's something that kind of happened. In the case of complex regulated financial instruments like real-world asset-backed tokens, obviously regulators are very keen to still have a role in that. There are consumer protection and investor protection, rationales for it. But if they start, getting together and actually recognizing each other's regimes and starting to follow the same regimes, that is another way of allowing this sort of portability and recognition of these assets across borders, so that, one that's minted here and distributed here can now immediately be traded to or sold to investors there. Now, it's early days, of course, and we're talking about, many countries around the world with national agendas and local regulators. But it's great to see things like that announcement with Hong Kong and Dubai saying we're now partnering up on this and exploring how we can achieve it. And Dubai's been very clear about that from the outset. What they want to do is be a catalyst for this creation of a global ecosystem to allow these assets to move seamlessly, to have global markets where people can participate in things from different places. And I always talk about it as being the electricity bill problem. Where can I buy regulated anything today? Well, anywhere as long as I have an electricity bill, so that I can convince the thing that's selling it in that market to allow me to onboard through their KYC, which kind of requires me to have an electricity bill. That's a little bit of a trite comment, but you know what I mean. So investors are sort of stuck in the jurisdiction they are. And this promise of the democratization and access to global assets will come about through this sort of multilateral, multi-jurisdiction, regulatory collaboration.
Yeah, making it more seamless, right? We have lots of global citizens these days.
Exactly.
You all also have a partnership with Virtuzone. Are they also based out of Dubai?
They are indeed based in Dubai. So we have a number of projects that we'll be announcing over the next few weeks. This is the one we announced kind of in sync with our the announcement of our licenses, which was only 8 days ago now, so it's all pretty fresh, this. So Virtuzone are the Middle East's largest corporate services company. So they provide, assistance with, incorporation, visas, payroll, all of the kind of support services that particularly, smaller and medium-sized businesses require. So they have, I think something like 5,000 or 6,000 businesses that they're supporting in terms of that function. And the number one thing that all of their companies say is challenging, and this is not news for early stage companies, is access to capital. How do I go and do fundraising? And the world has ways of doing it. There are crowdfunding rules and ways of doing crowdfunding. I think actually the US has a reasonably good crowdfunding regime with reasonably high ceilings, but actually in many parts of the world it's pretty restrictive as to how many investors you can onboard, how much you can raise, the requirements around registration of these certificates. So in practice, it's not actually that easy. But again, once you tokenize an equity, and so that's what we're going to do with them, we're going to take equity of these companies, we're going to tokenize it, create a digital representation of the shares, and then we're going to sell the shares at a primary market issuance in the form of fundraising. And provided we structure it correctly, there are no restrictions around how many investors, what type of investors, back to that retail point. And so you've suddenly got a situation where not only these companies that are promising have a way of sort of promoting and raising capital in a similar way to how people can do it with an IPO, but an IPO is designed for very large companies with very large budgets
at a much later stage. Yeah,
at a much later stage. So this is going to provide some of that sort of access to capital raising to earlier stage companies. On the flip side, how do you find an interesting private equity company to invest in today? It's really hard, it's word of mouth.
You have to know someone or be connected,
exactly,
or
and then you have
go
to
to
get
the right
school.
school.
Time, and it's luck, and there's no, how do I find out information about them? So it's a two-sided problem, and in some respects, people say, well, we've already got the stock market, and that does the big stuff. And I say, yeah, but private equity is 6-7 times bigger than public equity. So it's a much, much bigger market by value, and obviously far bigger in terms of volume of entities. Now, it's a different risk profile and everything else, but this is the promise of what can now be done is we tokenize this equity, we can put it on a platform, the companies can advertise, people can come and look, they'll be able to find these companies. There's the endorsement of having, being part of and being supported by not only by TOKO, but by Virtuzone, who are working with them and providing corporate services. So there's almost a credibility sort of, built into that structure because we'll only onboard, companies of a certain caliber. And I think that's going to be really interesting. Now, what's the market going to say about that? We'll wait and see. But I'm pretty confident people will be really interested. And because of the way TOKO works, where we put the deal in the token, lots of information about these companies, all of the legal documents, they'll all be hashed, embedded, financials. So it's kind of like the TOKO minted tokens become the living data room.
Yeah.
And it's there and it's accessible through the token to a whitelisted investor who's done the AML KYC. And so it's automating all of that very manual process of private equity that happens today.
Yeah. And just for our audience, data rooms, and correct me, Scott, but essentially data rooms are typically used when companies are doing a deal to be able to share information about, for example, the company's financials or other pieces of data that help investors make informed decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies, I'm portraying my history as a lawyer and using these terms so loosely. But you're absolutely right. It's the thing that has to get set up so people can make a decision, do I want to invest in this or not? And the problem with that process is it's paper-based, kind of digitized, but it's generally put together on a one-off fundraising, and that's quite an expensive exercise. And again, that inhibits or it restricts who can actually play, because again, you need to be of a certain size before you can pay the advisors and the lawyers and everything to set this up and everything else. So the idea is to streamline a lot of that process and provide people with access to the information to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I've never met someone working on a deal who has raved about their data room provider. So
no, I'm doing one myself, and no, I'm not raving.
Well, Scott, thank you for joining us. I think, I really enjoy these conversations because they are always wide-ranging, and I think you share so much with our community that they can learn from. Anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up today?
Well, as you know, I can always add lots, but I won't given timing. So great to see you again, Zenobia. Thanks for your time and the opportunity to join you again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.